Welcome to the Golf Swing Field Project. So this is a qualitative research project that documents how accomplished golfers of various levels experience the golf swing from the inside or their own perspective. Today's interview is a little bit different. This is the very first interview in the project, so I'll be interviewing myself to demonstrate the format that all of our future interviews will follow. So the way that we'll begin this is we'll conduct first an overview of a player profile. So I'll do this about myself. My golf background is that I've been playing for about 20 years. My current handicap is a 7. I've done some very small local tournaments in New Jersey. Moderate success. I think I shot 78, 79, and 80 in like the third round, but I made the cut. So I was happy with that. Another one I missed the cut, but just getting started in competitive golf. My average driver swing speed, it varies from about 114 to 119, depending on the day and depending on how I'm swinging. Ball speed tends to be around 160 to 175. And then average distance would be carry is probably around 280, 290. And then, with rollout, it's a little above 300 most of the time. Strength of my game, generally speaking, I'm pretty long. I hit the ball very high, which can be a detriment when it's windy, but generally pretty good ball striker. Weaknesses, absolutely short game, chipping particularly. I actually chip cross-handed because I struggle so much with chipping, but putting is so-so, kind of depends on the day. In terms of my equipment, I have some very old equipment. I have Titleist TP2s that are probably 10 years old. And my driver is a TaylorMade slider, also very old. The newest club in my bag is my putter. I have a Lab DF3, which I like, but I don't putt great with it, but it is a great putter. In the past, I've worked with different coaches here and there. I've worked with Nick Boba over at Hamilton Farms. I've worked with Brandon Wolf at Heron Glen. I've done some stuff at Golf Tech and just random kind of lessons with different people in the area here and there. I'm a swing junkie, so I'm kind of always on YouTube looking for tips. I love this stuff. And so, my technique has not necessarily changed that much. It sort of modulates. I'll try one thing and then try another thing later on. In terms of injuries or mobility limitations or anything like that, I have herniated discs that will occasionally slip and obviously influence my swing, but for the most part, I'm pretty good. I try to exercise a lot. I don't have great mobility, particularly in my ankles. I know that my ankle mobility is limited. My squats are not great. So there's some rotational issues that I have that I'm trying to work on. But, for the most part, I'm able to golf without pain or anything like that. And I generally feel great. So at this point, before we get into some of the feels that I have, we're going to try to have all of these interviews show what their swing looks like a little bit. So what I'm going to try to do is share my screen briefly. And here, so I should be showing a video of my swing real quick. This is just from the other day at the indoor simulator. So I'll just run it through. I'll do it in slow motion just so you can see it again. So it's an okay swing. I mean, some of the things that I notice about myself is I tend to pull the club inside a little bit too much. You can see that here. I don't love the way that my legs work. They kind of collapse a little bit instead of acting as a brace. But for the most part, it's a pretty athletic swing. You can see this one was about the swing speed that I mentioned. It was 116, 273 carry. So that's what my swing looks like. And again, just keep this in mind as we're going through the interviews so you can try to visualize what myself and some of our other interview subjects are referencing when they describe certain feels. So with that, we're just going to get into some more of the questions, and these are going to try to be standard questions that we ask to each guest. So generally speaking, in terms of like big picture, we'll start there. I would describe my swing as pretty athletic and powerful, maybe a little bit too effortful. It's not I wouldn't say it's a smooth, relaxed looking swing. In terms of what I'm trying to accomplish with my swing, I'm constantly working on, getting the club into a better position at the top. I'm trying to get my weight left and use my lead side and the ground better. I really struggle with that. I think in part because of mobility limitations, but it's also just difficult. I was a baseball and a hockey player, and so I definitely tend to use my hands more than I should. A lot of effort from the top instead of allowing the time to push into it with my left foot. But my biggest priority is having a more consistent swing that holds up under pressure and is honestly just not so wild, because I do swing relatively fast, and so my misses are gigantic. And some days, feels like I've never swung before, and other days it feels great. I'm trying to become, a scratch or a plus golfer. I would love to. I put enough time and effort into it, so that's my goal. So now we're going to get into the next section where we're actually walking through my swing and the feels that I have, and this is hopefully the core of this research project, this channel, and all of the data that we hope to gather through this process. So let's talk first setup. So when I am setting up, there's a couple of feels that I try to have. The first thing is I try to feel that my back is flat. I sometimes can have rounded shoulders at the top, and I try to keep my shoulder blades a little bit flatter. I try to have a slight bend in my knees, mostly just a hinge through my hips. And I try to keep the weight on the forward part of my foot. One of the other thoughts that I have, or feels that I have, excuse me, at setup is trying to keep the weight on my right side, or my trail foot, a little bit more on the inside of that foot. So I try to keep the weight, almost like on the inner part of all along my right foot. That's my main setup feel, because I don't want to sway as I turn. Next is sort of like trigger. So some people have a trigger that sort of initiates their swing. Other people just jump into it. I play around with it. I will sometimes do a quick sort of shift left before I start to swing. But for the most part, I start pretty statically, and I do think about what I want to accomplish before I begin any move. Getting into the takeaway, the thing that I struggle with the most is, again, like I mentioned in the video, pulling the club inside too much and getting too deep and too across my chest. And so what I really work on is feeling like I'm pushing down with my lead hand and pulling up with my right hand to try to hinge the club a little bit faster than I normally would. When I sometimes watch my swing, I'll be taking the club back and my wrists are still very much neutral. So I want to get them into that flexed position a little bit earlier. So that's the first thing that I think about as I begin the takeaway. The other thing I try to do is, for me, when I'm looking down at my right foot, I try to feel like I'm bringing the club, or bringing my hands almost towards my right toe instead of towards my right pocket. That tends to help me not get the club so far inside, and it puts me in a better position at the top. In terms of like the middle of the backswing, what I'm looking for is when there's like a sensation of the club feeling light is when I have my best swings. It tells me that I'm not pinning my arms across my chest, and I'm also still connected. So I don't want to feel like my arms are away from me, because then the club still feels heavy, but it also feels loose and wobbly. And I don't want it tucked in and pressed up against my chest, because then it just feels way too hard to get the club high enough. So I want the club to feel light and sort of balanced as I turn away. At the top, what I really try to focus on is keeping my right arm as long as I can. I tend to have a habit of bending this right hand or this right elbow too much and getting the club a little bit too close to me. So I try to stay out wide. And then I'm also constantly focusing on the position of my wrists. I tend to have a little bit too much cup in my lead wrist, and so I'm tending to feel like I'm bowing it. Now, when I see it in video, there is no bow, but I am focusing on that. And I play around with focusing that sensation on the left hand versus the right hand. Sometimes I'll feel like I'm really bowing with my left hand, my lead hand, and then the right hand just follows. Other times I feel like I'm actively extending this right hand, which then brings the other hand in with me. But that's sort of what I'm trying to feel in terms of the top of the backswing. I'm also trying to focus on having my chest turn more so that my arms are more in front of me. Again, with pulling the club too far inside, I often get my hands way too far behind me and like a ton of pressure from my arms through my chest. So I try to really make sure I've turned my chest enough so that there's room as I do that. Moving on to transition. Now I try to feel like I'm putting weight into my left foot, but I often struggle with that. Another thing that I've been playing around with lately is feeling like there's so much counterintuitive feels to the downswing, I think. So what I'm really working on at the moment is feeling like my left hip sort of stays relaxed as I move into transition. What I was finding was that when I feel like I'm pushing really hard through the ground, I tend to just stand up and extend, and then my rotation stops. But if I can keep that left hip feeling loose and soft as I begin the downswing, I tend to get into that side a little bit better, and then I can fire through it. So in terms of the downswing, again, what I'm trying to feel is that on the downswing, I try to feel like my hands are in front of the club head. So how do I describe this? If I was looking at myself from kind of down the line of the target, I want the club to feel like it's almost pulling my hands back towards me. I don't want the club out in front of my hands. If I can do that, it makes rotation feel a little more comfortable. And more than anything, it makes me feel like I have more room when it comes to impact. Now, speaking of impact, this is an area that I still need to work on. I don't think I quite have the right feeling of impact yet. I'm kind of always playing around with, am I just extending both wrists and kind of throwing it like that? Is there any rolling of my forearms? At the moment, I tend to put so much effort from the top of the backswing into impact, as if impact with the ball is the end goal, that I oftentimes have like a short follow through because all the energy has been released and it almost looks like a held off swing even with a driver. So that's something that I need to continue to work on, because my impact feeling is like smashing into the ball, and then I'm not quite sure what to do. So one of the things I want to work on is learning how to more smoothly get through the ball while still maintaining or increasing speed. And that kind of refers to, again, the release that I play around with. Am I keeping my wrist level and just going like this? Am I rotating as I turn? Am I coming into it with more of a flexed wrist, or is my wrist more neutral? Are my hands in front of it? So the release for me varies, and I think that's the biggest factor holding back my consistency. In terms of the finish, I try to make sure that I have balance. If I have a very balanced, what feels like a good-looking finishing position, the result is oftentimes very good, because it means more than anything. For me, I didn't rush, or I didn't swing too hard, or I didn't try to, I didn't kind of lose it on the way down and have to save it. So if I can have a balanced swing, I often associate that with like a nice, solid, heavy feeling strike. So that's really kind of the goal for me. Now, so the next section is just some global kind of sensations that I have about my swing that we're going to ask everybody. For me, again, rhythm is important. I think it's important for many people, but my feeling is that I try to go back smoothly and come down smoothly, but with more effort. Tempo I play around with. If I'm working on swing speed, I do notice that, if I really feel like I'm pulling the club back much faster, I tend to also swing faster. But in terms of like rhythm, one of the things that I'm trying to work on too is like getting the sensation of changing directions while my hands are still going back, so that I can increase lag. When I see my swing on video, I feel like there's oftentimes a release of the lag too early. And it's because I kind of take everything back at once and then go down at once. I'm trying to like separate those two pieces to increase the stretch between them, but I'm still working on that quite a bit. In terms of misses, bad misses for me, it's not even so much about the where the ball goes for me. Honestly, it's more about like how the club feels in my hands. Bad swings feel like the club is moving around in my hands, or wobbling at impact, or not giving me enough room to rotate and release the way that I want. There's many times that the result is okay, but it's maybe shorter, or it's got a weird ball flight. But more than anything, I'm looking for a sensation that feels strong and stable. I oftentimes can tell before I've made contact with the ball if it's going to be a good one or a bad one. I think I mostly notice it as I reach the top of my backswing. I can kind of tell, I go, oh crap, this is going to be bad, I got to save it, or this feels like I'm in a good spot. In terms of like general learning, learning about the swing, I think, well, I'm a big YouTube tutorial guy. I'm a big using ChatGPT guy to film my swing, to constantly get feedback. So I have a pretty good knowledge of swing concepts and like what I should be trying to do. And when I see my own swing, I can kind of see some of that stuff, but it's not always clear on what feeling you need to change in order to achieve that new look or that result, which is honestly part of the reason that I wanted to create this whole research study is because I think feels are so different than what we're actually doing in many cases. I think my favorite swing thought is that sensation of getting my hands towards my right toe as I go back and then keeping the club head behind my hands on the way down. This gives me just room and it lets me feel really athletic as I do it. In terms of like shot specific feelings, I would say everything I've described is pretty much my standard swing, whether it's a driver or an iron. I don't play around with like intentional draws and fades too much at my level. I'm a 7 handicap, so I'm usually shooting, high 70s. And for me, I'm just trying to make solid contact and focus on that stuff. Like I said, I really struggle with the wedges. So, with the wedges, I'm oftentimes actually doing a cross-handed grip if I'm anywhere inside of 100 yards. And with that, the sensation is that it's so much easier for me to feel like my hands are in front of the club head, so there's no desire to flip, which allows me to just be more confident. They're not pretty shots. The swing looks ugly. I can't hit it very high or get much speed with the backhanded, but I do make good contact. So it allows me to keep my rounds going. And it, for the most part, is good, especially as I get closer to the green and it's more like a chip shot. The only thing I would say in terms of different feels with a bunker shot is I really try to feel like I'm hinging the club straight up. And I almost feel like I'm kind of falling backwards as I let my hands release. That kind of keeps the club from digging too deep into the sand. And it allows me to get that feeling of truly releasing the club past me aggressively. If I try to, if I have any coming forward or driving into it, I tend to either take a ton of sand or I'll just hit it a mile over the green. So for me, that's the biggest key, is hinge it straight up and feel like I'm kind of moving backwards as I come into impact. Just a couple of other things. So we'll try to do like a quote unquote like lightning round at the end of these interviews. So my favorite feel is that sensation I talked about of, getting my hands in front of my toe. My favorite drill, I don't know. I don't think I have one, but I will come back to that. My favorite player to watch would be Tiger from, the 90s and 2000s. I think that swing was just amazing. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. And then in closing, so I think, let's see. I think that's about it. Yeah, so that's basically it. Again, so that what we're trying to do is capture all sorts of individuals who play golf competitively or at a relatively high level. What are their feelings? What are they experiencing in the golf swing? And let's dive into the details of that. I've been searching for that kind of information for years. I've never seen it. And so I hope this becomes a repository of golfers of all different levels that can do that. I want this to become a resource for golfers who are curious about, what accomplished players are feeling. And I also want to create a public archive of golf swing feels. So we're going to take the data from these interviews, we're going to plug it into a research database, we're going to code it, and then we're going to come up with themes. You'll be able to search by different feelings or different levels of player and hopefully get some insight that you can't get otherwise. So that's about it for me, and look forward to more of these in the future. Thank you.